Thank you everyone for joining us today. I can see more and more people kind of joining us as we're just getting past the hour. We're very much looking forward to today's session. We've got Jen Roberts chairing the session for us today, and Jen is our Deputy Director. I'm going to mute someone there. There we go. Deputy Director and ECR Champion, who's joined us on the Network Plus at the UK CCSRC. Just to quickly cover some housekeeping, please can you stay muted with your camera off during the presentations, and there'll be a chance to join the discussion at the end as well. So I'm going to hand over to you, Jen. Luckily that was a test, so we are all still staying in the office. But thank you, Jen.
Perfect. I'm also sort of trying to click through people to mute them, so the request for people just to check if they are on mute. And if you're not, just please do mute yourself, just because there was quite a bit of background noise, not just the fire alarm just then. But hello everyone, and welcome. It's really great to have so many people in this room, the Zoom room today. I'm really excited about this web event. We've got 2 hours together where we're going to be exploring the topic of CCS skills and jobs for a just transition. So skills and jobs in a kind of just transition context. And we're joined by a number of really exciting speakers. We've got Pauline, Olivia, Powis, Felicity Morris and Leslie Mabon here for the whole 2 hours. And the way it's going to run, we've got quite a lively, fast-paced session. So I think the last event that I chaired, I think it was in March, it was two speakers, Stuart and Niall, speaking for about 30 minutes each, and this is a slight sort of deviation from that longer format. It's frustrating for our speakers probably, because I've had to really sort of slim things right down. But I wanted to get some of the kind of headlines and overarching sort of points in this first hour, which is going to be, most of the talks will be recorded. We'll have then a short break just to stretch legs, quick refreshment. And then we'll go into an open discussion. The discussion will not be recorded. So I know that people in the audience here today as well are working on topics related to this. And so I really hope that in that discussion, we can bring in other contributions and other thoughts, as well as kind of the Q&A aspect as well. So I think when we, my request would be that when we have our speakers speaking, sharing their slides, if you have specific questions of clarity, please put them in the chat. And put them, just say, just type that out, and I will interrupt if I think that that needs expanding. Otherwise, I think maybe pop your questions into the chat and we'll save them for, and kind of group them for the discussion at the end. So it's up to you when you want to pose your questions. You can do it throughout the webinar, but for specific questions of clarification on the speaker topics, then absolutely put them in, and I'll interrupt the speaker if I think that needs clarifying, as I said. Fab. Okay. I will not take up much more time. We've got quite a packed agenda. 4 speakers, approximately 10 minutes each. I've given Pauline a little bit longer as she's going to be setting the scene. So what I'll do is I'll be quiet and I'll hand over to Pauline. I'm going to let Pauline introduce herself. All of our speakers, that'd be great if you can introduce yourself at the very beginning of your talk. And yeah, no, without further ado, over to you, Pauline. I'm hoping we've got Olivia Powis from the CCSA, this Carbon Capture and Storage Association, and we've also got Felicity here as well, Felicity Morris from BP. And I think that together, Olivia and Felicity will be giving us a bit more of an insight about the CCS specific aspects of this. What are we thinking? What do we know about the skills supply chain? How are just transition principles being thought about in the delivery of those skills as well? I mean, let's wait and see what Olivia and Felicity are going to share. But I think you've set the scene really nicely, and we'll come back to some of the questions that have been asked in the chat in the discussion. So thank you, and let's hand over to Olivia. Hi, Olivia, it's great to have you here.
Hello, and thank you very much for asking me today. It's great to be here. I'm Olivia Powis, head of the UK office at the CCSA, the Carbon Capture and Storage Association. I am just going to share my screen, I think. Has that worked?
we can see the slide with the slide deck as well, rather than sharing full screen. Perfect.
Is that right? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, I will. I'll go through. So first of all, I'll just give a little introduction to the CCSA, and then cover skills and supply chain for CCUS scale up. So for those of you who don't know, the CCSA is the trade association promoting the commercial deployment of carbon capture, utilisation and storage. I'm just aware I've seen some names that are on an event I was presenting at yesterday on a similar topic, so they will have heard this very recently. About the CCSA, so we are unique in our representation of the entire CCUS value chain, and we focus on advocating for policy developments in the UK, EU and internationally towards a long-term regulatory and incentive framework for CCS. We raise awareness of CCUS as a vital tool in fighting climate change and delivering sustainable long-term growth and driving progress on commercial scale projects. And we're also technology neutral. So we have members and we represent across the whole value chain, across storage and utilisation, capture from industry, power, hydrogen, BECCS, DACs and different capture technologies. And here, just a representation of our members. We have had a significant increase in members over the last year. I think we've doubled our membership, and right across the value chain, you can see this. So from storage to power and industrial members, carbon capture developers. We've had a big increase in engineering equipment, EPC contractors, and then also CO2 transport and distribution, and largely also sort of an increase in financial and service industries, consulting and others, including academics there. So skills and supply chain for CCUS scale up. I don't know what's happened to the other half of my slide there. Just as a quick recap, I think you'll all know this, but just in case you're unaware of the history, over the last year, 2021, it was a year of ambition for UK government in CCUS. So in November 2020, the Prime Minister announced the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, and in there he announced that the ambition to capture 10 million tonnes of CO2 per year by 2030 and to deploy 4 CCUS clusters, 2 by the mid-2020s and 2 by 2030. And then we went on to have the publication of the Industrial Decarbonisation Strategy, the UK Hydrogen Strategy, and a huge number of other government documents that came out last year related to CCUS. But then with the net zero strategy in October 2021, so yes, less than a year later, the ambition had moved from 10 million tonnes to capture between 20 and 30 million tonnes per year of CO2 per year by 2030. And also announced the 2 Track 1 clusters, so the East Coast cluster and HyNet Northwest Track 1 clusters, and also announced there that there would be 10 million tonnes for the Track 2 clusters by 2030 out of that 20 to 30 million tonnes. Sorry, I don't know what, it should be just 20 to 30 million tonnes in that top bold bullet there. So just a huge increase in ambition in less than a year, and an awful lot of progress. And in that time, launched the cluster sequencing process, and that was in February 2021. And so then went from that to in October, announcing those first 2 Track 1 clusters with the Scottish cluster as reserve. So a really fast moving and significant progress in that time, and the industry has really sort of had to ramp up and engage with government in terms of developing all the business models and moving it forward. And just here, this is taken from a government's document. This is not ours, but their 2035 delivery plan. So just to have a look there, I don't know if I can highlight on this screen, but we are so now in the process of track 1 clusters are going through feed and will be sort of entering a period of negotiation. The phase 2 process is due to be announced in July, and along with, I believe, the next stage of the track 2 cluster sequencing. So we are at the moment still on track to keep moving, and an awful lot of activity, but we really need government to keep the momentum up and keep progress so that we can have the next round of track 2 clusters announced, and then the next the deployment timetable ongoing from there. So in terms of allocation rounds and moving forward, so that industry and investors can have confidence and know what the forward plan is there. But there's a huge amount of activity. You'll see there's a bit of a gap sort of around 2025 to 2030, and I think that's where the CCSA is really, and I'll talk about this in a moment, but really pushing that we have to keep momentum there, and we've got to keep moving forwards, and the industry will need to know how they can move forwards during that time. Just to put it in context with a map here of so we have the track 1 clusters, HyNet, an East Coast cluster on the right there, and also then the Scottish cluster that's track 1 reserve. And under that, the numbers of the phase 2 applicants that are relevant to each of those clusters, so the emitting projects that have been that were on the long list that BEIS published, and of eligible projects, and so a proportion of those are likely to go forward or will go forward in July, but we'll find out which ones they are in July. But really just to look at the map as well and see the number of other clusters that are developing. And I think when we started our work on the delivery plan, this was really there's been significant progress and movement here, new clusters developing all the time, new projects that are interested in CCUS and flagging their interest there. So it's this map is a moving beast, and we're continually sort of having to add new circles to it and new engagements. So it's great to see the interest and growth in CCUS and hydrogen. And I thought, just we're talking about supply chain, it might be useful just to recap on the government's plans and where they are. So they published the supply chain roadmap in May 2021, and in that recognised that there was no agreed definitional model for UK supply chains, and that we needed clarification on opportunities for transitioning sectors. And took to undertake a comprehensive mapping exercise of the UK CCUS supply chain to identify the commercial potential, address the skills and capability gaps, and anticipate the domestic and global deployment of CCUS to 2030. And there is also, they set up a CCUS Council working group that reports into the CCUS Council, chaired by the Minister on Supply Chains. But particularly there on skills and innovation, that there's a need to develop a coherent skills plan and a sustainable CCUS skills base to enhance productivity whilst developing new CCUS jobs. And we need to consider the skills necessary for the UK CCUS supply chain, consistent with the Green Jobs Task Force and the North Sea Transition Deal. And I'll come on in a second to the NSTA's recent publication on the North Sea transition skills. So they really set out there, and that was over a year ago, in terms of the work that needs to be done, the coordination really that has got to be done across the energy transition, and mapping out the jobs that will be needed across CCUS and also the sort of wider energy sector. And just to highlight as well that the CCSA then published our Supply Chain Excellence for CCUS report, which in July last year, which was really it was a first stab at setting out the opportunity for the supply chain in the UK for CCUS and the areas that we needed to really target and the areas of opportunity. And I think particularly here to point to the last point in terms of long-term jobs. So the ongoing operation of CCUS creates long-term jobs in the communities and clusters which host them, which plays a significant contribution to levelling up in terms of where those clusters are located. And the expectation was that around 90% of the economic activity that was highlighted in this report would be UK based and local to plant. So a real opportunity here for the skills and jobs agenda. And I wanted then to come on to the CCSA's CCUS Delivery Plan. So this was a report that we published in March of this year, and it was to really bring together the industry to respond to the net zero strategy and to set out how we would achieve the UK government's 2035 ambition of storing at least 50 million tonnes of CO2 per year by 2035. It had two strands. It was to profile the recommended build-out rate of CCUS in the UK to reach those ambitions and identifying the actions required to enable its delivery. And it was set up with these building blocks that you can see in the diagram on the slide here, and with the sort of actions at the bottom, sort of underpinning it all, of, I'm just going to move this camera here, of an attractive investment framework. So providing a regulatory and incentive framework in place to drive private sector investment. And timely cluster delivery. So we need clusters to be delivered at pace with greater visibility and fast-tracked legislation and regulatory activity, so that there's a sustained capture project pipeline which supports network deployment, but also jobs, so that the people who are going to build the transport and storage networks and then operate in terms of these projects, that there's a clear timeline there of when they will be likely to be deployed and when they'll be needed. And we engaged with a lot of members and stakeholders to identify the key points and the actions that need to be carried out to enable its delivery. And you'll see there that these were the key. So the key points there were highlighted, and healthy supply chain and skills was a really critical building block within this. So it's essential that we get it right and that we maximise the local supply chain from domestic clusters and develop export markets.
Olivia, we've run out of time. We're about 5 minutes over. Are you close to completing?
I can run through, so I won't go through this. This was the build out rate analysis. I'll move through, but really it just shows the huge potential for CCUS in the UK. And then I'll move on to just these points, the healthy supply chain and skills. So here what we set out here is that as the opportunity to provide economic benefits to the UK and levelling up agenda if the supply chain receives investment and focus, and that we really needed to work across all those stakeholders at the bottom. And these were the key urgent and enabling actions for the supply chain and skills. So gaining consensus on UK strengths in product and skill areas to prioritise for investment, setting the policy and regulation to incentivise UK content, and accelerating entry into the workforce needed to meet demand. And there at the bottom, the sort of enabling actions as well, focusing on future skills, demand mapping and modelling. So you can see that the need to accelerate the entry into the workforce is a really critical and urgent action, and some work is already being undertaken there, but it's an area where we need to continue to focus and really focus on the skills and the timelines when we'll need those skills and how they'll build in. And I'll just wanted to draw attention to the North Sea Transition Deals Integrated People and Skills Strategy, which was published a couple of weeks ago, and highlights here the estimated jobs per sector of direct and indirect employment, and you can see hydrogen and CCUS there on the top, so providing a significant part of those jobs, but the need to coordinate across all these sectors when we're looking at skills and transitioning. They were just key points from that, and I'll finish here. This is the last one, but this was the supply chain landscape, and I think it's quite a useful diagram, but just shows all the different activities and organizations that are involved there, and how we need to sort of work together across all these to make sure that we are addressing the skills agenda, and really we'll have sufficient skills and workforce there to be able to deploy the clusters and the huge ambition and potential for the CCUS industry. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Olivia. And I think I've got quite a few discussion points that I'm really excited to explore. I'm actually really glad you were able to cover those later slides as well, because they've started to put a number on some of these things, and I think that will come up in the discussion too. So thank you. I will very swiftly hand over to Felicity Morris from BP, and I think Karis will be presenting Felicity's slides. And at this point, I think I should probably just signpost that we are probably going to finish the talks bit about 3 o'clock, so the short break will be a little bit later than planned. But it's great to have Felicity along. Actually, I believe this is the first kind of UK CCSLC event you've been along to.
It is. I've got big shoes to follow and fill with. So a big thank you to Olivia and Pauline on that. It was a great setup, and I think what we're picking up thematically is this is complex and doable, but also it can't be done alone. And I think that's really thematic of what we're doing at BP. So hi, I'm Felicity Morris. The reason that I'm here is I'm deeply passionate about it, not only the just transition, but skills development. So in BP, what I look at is future skills and sustainability. So, thank you so much for inviting me along today. I really wanted to sort of ground it out in what it can look like. And we've got an example of that on what BP is doing in Teesside. And we're far from perfect, and we've got a lot to learn, but it's really worth talking about what the opportunities are and what the challenges are on a really local basis. So we've got here, I'm not going to move on to the slides just yet, but I suppose the big question is, why is this relevant? Why is it relevant for CCS, and why the heck is BP doing anything about it? I think that one of the clear signs that we needed to shift is not only just the overwhelming amount of information that we have about climate change, but also internally we had a new CEO come in and launch a purpose around a very clear net zero ambition. So we want to accelerate our transition and sustainable energy. And in order to do that, we need to do that in partnership in the communities we operate, and very much have our people at the heart of it. Sorry, I've got computer problems and a bit of a cough, so apologies if I do that every so often. But the oil and gas energy and the energy industry as a whole it's a crucial role to play in enabling a just transition for its workers and the people that it operates with. And the future of net zero is inextricably linked to CCS. It's the deployment of skills that Pauline talked about, but the knowledge, the experience, and the assets to make it all happen. And the roles and skills in CCS map very closely those needed in the energy industry. So there are opportunities out there for jobs with minimal need to retrain. And I think Pauline's point was a great one. We often focus on those heavy technical engineering roles, but that's also true of the wider value chain of activities. So, by enabling high emitting industries to continue production, CCS retains jobs in the industry as well. I think it was a great point there. It's the supply chain, it's the wider economy that works around it. And because of that, you need to address systemically all of the parts of it when we're talking about skills for a just transition. So, what's important for us is working with companies, all of the ones that you've seen on the screen, and the sector initiatives, but also communities and workers to start of it. But I'm going to talk about Teesside. So my accent, as you can probably guess, is from further south. It is from Australia, but just in case other people aren't familiar with Teesside, I really just wanted to talk very quickly about what Teesside is. And on the next slide, we'll sort of talk about what we're doing. But Teesside is like the former heart of UK's steel industry. And because of that, you've got accounts for over 5% of the UK's industrial emissions. And it's home to 5 of the highest CO2 emitting sites. So industries like this would struggle to meet UK's net zero commitments and may not survive unless it can find a way to reduce emissions. And we want to help as well. So our vision is to create the world's first decarbonised industrial cluster. So what does that actually mean? What does that look like? On the next slide, it will have 4 projects that we're completing on it. So I'm sure it will click over in a second. But we're looking at building thank you so much, Karis, I really appreciate it. So we're building UK's first gas-fired power station where CO2 from the power generation will be captured. This will provide low carbon electricity for 1.3 million homes, or 5% of homes in the UK. We're building infrastructure for CO2, and we've talked about the East Coast cluster already, but we're looking at storage of like 10 million tonnes of CO2 per year from some of those activities, and that's the equivalent emissions for 3 million homes. We've also had 2 recent carbon storage licenses by the North Sea Transition Authority and the North Endurance Partnership, and that means the capacity will be about 1 billion tonnes of CO2 in total. So we're planning this all operational. The thing is, though, then what does that actually mean? What does that mean in terms of jobs? To Jen's point, let's put some numbers on this. What does it actually mean? Things like this and these initiatives create in the realm of 4,000 to 5,000 jobs a year in construction, and about 1,600 a year in operations. More broadly, CCS will protect about 16,000 existing jobs in the region that could be at risk if the industry didn't decarbonise. And because of that, we've really got to think deeply about what that means for people of good, valuable jobs, and also the economic value it brings. So it's not just jobs, it's the wider society that's impacted on that, whether that be supply chain, whether that be community. It's a huge thing, and it's not something we go into lightly. But what does this actually mean? So what does this mean for the jobs? What does this mean to the skills? Get to the heart of it, Felicity. We want to think deeply about what's required to support a net zero transition, and we want to partner with regional and local communities. The reason we want to do that is for too long, people come in, they pull a lever, we hire all these people, and the community doesn't necessarily benefit from the same way for what they're investing. It's the right work to be doing, and it's not always straightforward. So we want to meet people where they are, but also where their aspirations for the future are, where they think about what's important for them and their kids. So when we're looking at the ecosystem, and thank you, Pauline, I'm sure I owe you a wine or a drink or something for setting that up so lovely. Our contributions have to be more than just one initiative, or just about hiring people, just about applying jobs. And apologies for the next slide that's about to pop up, but on the next slide, it talks about in Teesside what a look at that contribution is. I'm conscious of time, so I'm not going to read this slide, but literally to say there are plenty of things that we need to do with a systematic response in partnership. And it really focuses on those 3 areas on the left-hand side, like capabilities, community renewal, and also social mobility. We need to make sure that we're addressing vulnerabilities for social inequities as well. So for the capability side, there's quite a lot there. We need to make sure that we're reskilling our people with decent jobs. That is delivering on our energy transition, but also that we know we can help advance that transition with some of the transferable skills that we've got. A traditional approach of going out there and hiring people just isn't an option. There aren't necessarily people out there to do that. So that question about supply and demand comes in. And there's also a lot of competition locally within region. With lots of big projects, there is a finite amount of skills that we can get in. So building our talent and partnering has to be the way forward. It's good quality jobs at the right time. So we've been thinking about what skills do we need, but importantly, when. because there's no point skilling everybody up for something when technology shifts or policy changes will change that environment quite a lot. We want to do more, and we'll continue to do more. But for CCS, what that means is the first part is understanding skills transferability. For a lot of cases, for a lot of people, and they'll talk about it, it was like, okay, it's not necessarily new skills, it's the same discipline, but there's new context or new processes that I have to apply it. And that makes it a different conversation than fundamentally changing the way and direction of certain roles. So for example, I'd call out construction, which would be very, very similar, but also to our ops and maintenance people on the call. It's the same discipline, but with new technology and new processes. We also need to do things like on power development, process engineering, and fluid dynamics. They're some of the specific things, but it's not just about technical skills. The complexities and the challenges and the scale of the challenge, it requires new mindsets for a low carbon future. How do you integrate across energy types? What about the partnership that you need working with different parts of the community? How do you tackle complex problems together? How do you learn quickly? And what's the impact of digital? All of those things factor into reskilling for the future. But that's our challenge. We have had some success stories, people already who've shifted from traditional oil and gas backgrounds into more of CCS ones. In fact, our project director for Net Zero Teesside had his full career in oil and gas. So Andy Lane, he's a great leader if you see him. He's someone worth following. And it's also about those, so we do think there's opportunities there. I'm conscious of time and I could talk clearly all day. So if anyone wants to link up after and talk about detail, I'm very open to that as well. But I did want to talk about Teesside and what we're actually doing. We are funding skills specific initiatives and accelerators there. So in Teesside, that looks like the Clean Energy Education Hub, and that's through partners like Redcar and Cleveland College. So we're investing £50,000 to set that up, and that's looking at industry training and career pathways for school leavers, apprenticeships and adult learners. We're also investing back into the community. We need to engage and build understanding of what project means, but also local startups and access to market skills and mentoring. So the types of things that you can see happening there is looking at what does this mean for long-term unemployed people? What is in terms of what can we do to help support them? They're part of the community. What skills can we help generate that support the community that we're in? Also, I think I've got probably 1 minute, Jen, I think is that part there. Other ones is in terms of the community and supporting the community, it's looking at also our teacher population. How do we skill up them to support a STEM pipeline, but also addressing some of those equities in STEM, whether they be minority of gender, whether that be ethnic background, all of those things is we've got specific targeted parts in there. So we have a clean energy education hub in Teesside. So we could be planning with business in the community to provide job mentoring for out of work individuals and really upskill local people for next generation future skills. So it is that wider value chain of skills, just not the technical ones. The last one there, I think I am going to run out of time, Jen. So out of respect to everybody on this one here, I think it's more a case of, as far as the journey goes, we have a good understanding of what skills that we'll need for a period of time. And also the types of different people that we have the opportunity to attract into a role. And Pauline's point about green jobs, they're just jobs, you know, with something that impacts everybody in such a way. It's the way that we need to attract different types of skills and talents into jobs. We need to push ourselves. We need to look in different places. And as wonderful as I'm probably all making this out, it's only the beginning, and definitely we can't do it alone. And the important thing is we do treat it as a system in partnership. It's in terms of leading on great initiatives like this one, but also is in terms of our education partners, where do we need to borrow and work together with other organisations, working with the community as part of the community. We really need to have, we need more purpose-driven companies to collaborate, experiment, to share what they're learning to get out there. So thank you very much. In terms of time, I'll finish it there.
Thanks, Felicity. That's brilliant, and really helped to put a handle on some of these numbers, you know, and what does this mean? And yeah, you'll see I kind of engineered this webinar anyway to start from the broad and funnel down. Yeah, well, thank you. So I think with that, what we'll do, and we'll please do stay on for this discussion, Felicity, and a reminder to people, if you've got questions and so on, please put them in the chat. I'll start collating them. I've got my own notes as well. But Leslie, let's hand over to you. Thank you so much for being here. And you're going to bring a bit more of the kind of community and the public voice to this discussion. And I think just a heads up, how long do you think you need? Like 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
10 minutes. I can aim to, I'll talk for, let's say 10 minutes so we can have a break just after 3.
Perfect. Thank you, Leslie. And please introduce yourself as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jen. My name is Leslie Mabon, and I am from the Open University. I work in environmental systems, and I've been working on CCS for a number of years in different contexts, both in Scotland and also particularly in Japan as well. And I'm going to provide, I don't want to say I'm going to be a party pooper, but I'm going to provide a perspective that maybe gives some, I want to just bring out maybe some of the challenges and some of the difficult questions when it comes to CCS skills, jobs, and a just transition. And so hopefully there's a bit of a kind of prompt or a provocation for the discussion that's going to come. And so I think to sort of start that, what I think is worth thinking about is this idea of a just transition. So a transition that a move to a net zero society that doesn't leave people behind or create new inequalities, and especially one that is sensitive to people and places that maybe rely on carbon intensive and high emitting activities. A just transition, it's not just about jobs and skills and economies, but it's also about thinking about what does it mean for places, and what does it mean for the kind of society that we want to live in. And so I think that against this, there's a really critical background picture that has to be borne in mind about, in whose interest is the transition to a net zero society happening, and how can that bring benefit to communities and to workforces that are, have thus far had to shoulder the burden of a lot of infrastructure, and particularly in the context of CCS. Do people even want it? Do people even know what it is? How does it fit with the sort of narrative of what happens next? And I was just to kind of illustrate what I mean when I talk about places and culture and society. So I was really pleased there to see mention of Teesside. I'm a big fan of football. Anybody who knows me on social media will know I'm a big fan of football. This is the Middlesbrough home shirt from 2 seasons ago, I think. And you'll see there's some lyrics from a song about the landscape in Teesside, and about the ICI, the chemical works, the industrial landscape. So I just wanted to drop that in there, so this is what I mean when I say that when we talk about industries and transitioning industries, we're not just talking about jobs, economies, and skills. We're talking about culture, society, people's sense of who they are. So that's one of the issues I think as well, and I'm happy to chat more in the discussion about this, about this worth thinking about how, if at all, does CCS fit within that. Nonetheless, there is, and I said I was going to bring in some challenges and questions here, and I wanted to again caveat some of the things I'm going to say with a quote that a former student of mine, Adrian Gonzalez, had pulled out of a bit of work he did. And this is a quote from an interviewee, which about talking about CCS, which was, how do you convince the general populace of a technology solution that no one likes? And if we look at what's happening around CCS in the last couple of years, we're starting to see a picture where some, but not all of the NGOs, the non-governmental organisations, are maybe shifting in their stance from being, shall we say, neutral or value neutral towards CCS to actually starting to be a bit more hostile and openly critical. And I mean, I don't mean to single out Friends of the Earth Scotland here, but Friends of the Earth are one in this regard, who have actually been starting to put out statements in Scotland, at least, that are a bit more critical of the role that CCS has in a transition. Similarly, you look at some of these things, the investigative journalism site, The Ferret, and they did this piece of work, came out recently about, actually last year, about just kind of cast doubt on some of these claims about about jobs, about emissions, about what might be associated with CCS. And as I say, the reason I raised that is not to be a kind of party pooper, but again, the reason I flag this up is that there is this bigger picture where, you know, you have these pressure groups and you have these sections of society, you know, who do influence what the public thinks, who do influence what communities think and influence what politicians and decision making and how decision making happens. There is this, you know, this backdrop against which there is, you know, a bit more skepticism, shall we say, about the extent to which CCS fits within a net zero society for the UK. You know, and so we had some protests last year as well up in the northeast of Scotland, where they came in and furled big banners about clean gas being a dirty lie. And again, as I say, the reason I put this up is to just raise that question. Okay, well, who is CCS for? What is it for? Who does it benefit? Are there potential ways in which it might, you know, and associations that that could, you know, that might swing some of these pressure groups against CCS? A few more of Adrian's quotes, and I want to just pull out, and I want to focus in a bit in a second on the skills angle, because I'm aware that's what I was asked to talk about. But I want to focus just here on this this bottom left point from one of the interviews. This point here, that's 3 failures this person has said to deliver a CCS project. They've had 3 government failures. And if you're thinking about promoting skills related to CCS, jobs related to CCS, it's part of a net zero transition, as part of a just transition. There is again also this backdrop, this background context, where from the outside looking in, you will have less informed, whether it's stakeholders, whether it's publics, less informed people looking at CCS and thinking, okay, this has been tried a number of times, it hasn't worked. Why should we believe that it's going to be any different this time? You know, and again, I'm raising that, I think, as just something to be aware of, the need to kind of create that narrative of how going forward, what we see with CCS is going to be different to what has happened before, particularly when we're talking about skill, about jobs, about economies, about places, about things that really matter to people's sense, not just for their livelihoods, but for their sense of who they are as individuals and communities. Again, so we've got the Just Transition Commission in Scotland, which was tasked with thinking about what a just transition means for Scotland. There is mention in there of CCS in their first report, but there's not a great deal. It gets a couple of mentions on a page. I know it's been talked about, but it gets mentioned in a few places within a much bigger context. Similarly, so these things have been coming out recently as well. Some of the non-governmental organisations have been working together to look at transitions for offshore oil and gas workers. And again, perhaps the various parts of CCS are not as prominent in these as the kind of community proponents of CCS might like them to be. So this is one that came out last year about retraining for offshore oil and gas workers. And again, there's a lot in there about offshore wind and renewables, perhaps not so much about the things that might fit into CCS or various bits of the chain. But the other thing that I think is absolutely vital to take out of that is, and again, it goes back to maybe what we've heard in some of the talks before, is this question of timeframes and timescales. And we're talking about lead-ins for CCS, even if we're quite optimistic there are certain lead-ins. Equally though, there are people, we've got oil and gas fields that are closing down now. We've got trade unions, NGOs that are screaming out for retraining and opportunities, not in 5 or 10 years, but now. Conversely as well, we talk about maybe the next generation of workers. So in a previous job of mine, I worked at Robert Gordon University, and one of the things I did was I taught engineering students who, by and large, were going to be going on to working in oil and gas at the time. So again, you're thinking about the workforce for tomorrow, the skills that we're going to need for CCS, particularly in some of these, the younger workforce. These are people that we need to be training up now. And again, I appreciate the points in some of the previous talks about not, knowing what we need to skill people up for and over what timescales. But if you think about how painfully slow universities are at developing curricula, the lead-ins, the number of forms that people like me have to fill in if we want to put something in a new module, these lead-ins are big as well. So again, the point is we need to start thinking now about how, if at all, we embed these issues of skills and training into either reskilling for more experienced workers or into, you know, initiatives now for younger workers in higher and further education. So as I say, just to sum up, you know, and again, just to kind of put this big background picture across of, well, who is CCS for? Who does it benefit? And, you know, and how might skills for CCS fit within that picture? There is that real need, as I say, to think about, well, what does CCS mean in the public interest? You know, especially now we've got a cost of living crisis. It's absolutely vital that there is, you know, real emphasis on a very clear picture, I think, of how this is going to help to provide meaningful jobs in communities that require it, and doesn't end up being perceived as something that is subsidising private sector operators who are rightly or wrongly, you know, perceived as profiting during a cost of living and an energy crisis. So, you know, that really can emphasise that question of who is CCS for, and how specifically and over what timeframes does it fit within a just transition. So again, just the last thing, this was the last bit of the survey that Adrian had done, that when he talked to other stakeholders, what a lot of people said was the big challenge that they saw with CCS, it's not the technical challenges, it's not actually the public acceptability, it's these sort of political questions about political will and things like that. So just to kind of leave you with a few points to think about at the break, you know, who are the audiences that we need to engage when we talk about jobs and skills for CCS? Trade unions, non-governmental organisations as opinion shapers, industry bodies, also as well local governments. You know, what is the role of local governments who might be seen as having a role in making that transition happen? You know, there is a real challenge around getting nuanced messaging out in a very polarised political and a very emotionally charged political and social environment. And this real need, as I say, of kind of showing very clearly how current and upcoming projects will differ from past attempts. You know, where and how exactly CCS is the most desirable and necessary option, and what can be done now by CCS, and what do we need to do now to start to meet just transition imperatives. So I will stop there. Thanks for your attention. I think we're at time for a break. I'll stop there, and I look forward to taking any comments, questions, and following this up in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. And absolutely, I think so. What we'll do now, we've had a number of different perspectives, from the very broad to the quite specific to the quite, you know, I guess that Leslie framed it, sort of questions to grapple with, actually. And I'd really like to make sure we have a break. I like to keep our webinars nice and humane. So what we'll do is we'll come back together. I want to give us at least, say, 5 minutes. So we'll come back together to start the discussion at 3:10. And what I'll do is when we're starting again, I'll turn back my video on and get going from there. So 5 minutes, come back together at 10 past. Thank you, everybody.